The shower whispered through the thin wall like steady rain. In the small bedroom, Aisha lay still beneath her blanket, eyes open to the dim ceiling. The faint smell of toast from last night lingered, mixed with the sterile soap her mother always brought home from the hospital. A pipe clicked somewhere in the wall. It was morning, though the sky outside the thin curtain was still gray. Not ready to decide between night and day, she sat up slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. On the chair waited her purple jacket, the one with the missing button, and on the floor her dinosaur backpack, already packed. She had packed it twice during the night. Inside were her pencils, a folded drawing, and her green Stegosaurus toy, whose eye had rubbed away. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold enough to make her toes curl. In the bathroom, water hissed against teal. Her mother was singing softly under her breath, a tune without words. The sound filled the apartment, safe and warm. But Aisha's stomach felt like it was made of stone. She stood, slid into her socks and shoes, then zipped her jacket all the way up to her chin. She touched the doorknob. It was cool, almost icy. The shower covered any sound she made. She breathed once and opened the door. The hallway smelled faintly of fried oil and laundry detergent. A bulb hummed above her. She moved slowly down the stairs, one careful step at a time. The stair creaked, but the hiss of water kept her secret. At the landing, she looked out a small window. The morning was pale, the streetlights still glowing orange. A bird perched on the wire and ruffled its feathers but did not sing. The front door was heavy. She leaned her shoulder against it until it gave a quiet sigh. Cold air slid in around her ankles. The world outside felt huge. The sidewalk glistened with leftover rain, and a thin mist floated above the asphalt. The buildings on Oak Avenue looked half asleep, their windows blank, the store signs dark. 4 blocks, she told herself, only 4 blocks. She whispered it again like a spell. Her breath made a little cloud. She started walking, past Mr. Chin's grocery. The shutters rolled down and locked. The sign inside faded to ghost letters. She glanced at her reflection in the metal surface, a small figure wrapped in purple, backpack hunching her shoulders. Her hands trembled, so she gripped the straps tight until her knuckles hurt. A car passed at the corner, headlights washing the street in white, then disappearing. She turned the corner, the sound of her shoes soft on the wet pavement. The laundromat lights glowed bright inside. She could see rows of round machines spinning, a woman in a hoodie pouring soap. The smell of detergent drifted through the glass. The hum of dryers filled the air. She liked that sound. It covered the quiet that scared her. She kept walking. At the empty lot beside the basketball court, puddles reflected the street lamps. The hoop's net hung torn. A single shoe lay on its side near the fence. She looked down the street again. No one followed, but her neck still prickled. She passed a parked red car, its metal ticking as it cooled. 6 clicks. Then silence. She matched her steps to the rhythm. 6. Pause. 6. Pause. It steadied her. When the bus turned the corner, brakes, sighing, the air filled with the smell of rubber and smoke, a paper cup rolled toward her shoe. She nudged it aside, then stepped back as the doors hissed shut and the bus pulled away. The street behind it looked wider, emptier. 3 blocks now, almost there. She crossed the intersection. The light changed from red to green with a faint electric hum. The grocery cart someone had left by the curb rattled in the wind. The cold slipped under her jacket and made her shiver. She pressed her hands into her pockets until her fingers found the toy dinosaur. The small plastic ridges bit into her palm. She held on to it like it could keep her brave. She turned onto Main Street. The sky had softened, no longer dark, not yet blue. Ahead of her, Rosie's diner glowed with its flickering neon sign. The pink letters buzzed faintly, the apostrophe blinking a beat late every few seconds. Through the window she saw steam, the shine of silver stools, and shapes moving inside. Motorcycles lined the curb outside, gleaming even under the gray sky, their chrome catching small pieces of light. Aisha stopped across the street. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted toward her. It mixed with the metallic scent of rain and gasoline. Her stomach twisted. She stood still for almost a minute, her breath shallow, the world holding its breath with her. The engines were silent now, but they looked alive, like sleeping animals. Her thoughts raced. What if they were mean? What if they laughed? What if they told her to go home? Her knees shook. She almost turned back. Then she remembered the black car, the window rolling down, the voice that said he knew where she lived. She saw again her mother's face last night. Eyes red, voice shaking on the phone. Nobody can help us. Aisha squeezed the dinosaur tighter. If everyone is scared of them, maybe the bad people will be scared too. The crosswalk was empty. She stepped off the curb. The first step was tiny, a test. The second felt bigger. By the third, she was in the middle of the street. The wet paint of the lines slicked beneath her shoes. A puddle splashed cold onto her ankle. She didn't stop. When she reached the motorcycles, she moved between them carefully. They smelled of oil and metal. One seat was still warm from use. A bead of water slid down a gas tank and fell onto her shoe. She whispered a quiet sorry to the machine. Up close, the diner's glass door was smudged with fingerprints. The brass handle shone dull from so many hands. Inside, she could see the counter lined with plates and the broad backs of men in dark leather jackets. Each vest was covered with patches, skulls, wings, names she couldn't read. One man lifted a coffee cup, steam curling past his beard. Another leaned to speak to the waitress. They laughed, deep, easy laughs that filled the space and made the window vibrate. It didn't sound like the cruel laughter from the hallways at school. It sounded like something solid. Aisha pressed her palm against the cold glass. The metal bell above the door trembled slightly in the wind. She looked down the street she had come from. The 4 blocks stretched behind her like a long, thin thread, leading back to fear. Her heart thudded so hard, she could feel it in her ears. She looked again at the faces inside. The man with the gray beard was the biggest. He looked strong enough to lift a car. But when he turned toward the waitress, his eyes softened, and he smiled. The light caught on the lines around his mouth. He looked tired, but kind. She took a breath. The smell of bacon and coffee mixed with the crisp morning air. Her throat ached, but she swallowed. 4 blocks. You did 4 blocks. She stepped forward, pushed the handle, and the bell chimed. The sound was small, bright, like glass tapping metal. Every head in the diner turned toward her. The door swung shut behind her, sealing in the warmth and the smell of frying pancakes. The air inside shimmered with steam and sunlight. Aisha's shoes squeaked on the black and white tiles. She hesitated just inside the doorway. The men at the counter had stopped talking. One set his fork down. Another straightened slowly. None of them looked angry. They just looked surprised. Puzzled. Aisha's fingers tightened on her backpack straps. The leather vests seemed even larger up close. She could see a tear stitched neatly on one, the edge of a patch frayed by years. The man with the gray beard turned his stool slightly, and for a moment his shadow fell over her. He smelled faintly of coffee and wind. He blinked once, studying the small figure in the purple jacket. The bell above the door swayed once more, the faint ring fading into silence. Aisha's throat was dry, her lips parted, but no sound came. She glanced toward the window, where outside The motorcycles gleamed like a line of armor in the gray morning. Then she looked back at the man. Her voice found her at last, a whisper under the hum of the diner. She took one more step forward. The light from the windows struck the floor, turning the tile gold for a second. She stood inside it, small but steady. Then she lifted her chin, drew in a breath that made her chest rise and fall, and stepped the last step into Rosie's. The bell's echo faded into the warm air of the diner, and for a moment everything stood still. The smell of bacon, coffee, and oil hung heavy, wrapping Aisha like a blanket. The man with the gray beard, Jack, rose from his crouch slowly, his boots silent against the tile. The eyes behind his weathered face stayed on her, kind but steady, the way a steady hand keeps a small flame from blowing out. He nodded once toward a woman at the counter. Rosie. Without a word, she slid a mug across to Aisha. Steam rose in soft ribbons from the surface, carrying the scent of chocolate and tiny melting marshmallows. The cup was warm, so warm it startled her fingers. She wrapped both hands around it, grateful for something to hold. Rosie turned the mug slightly, so the chip on the rim faced away. Jack crouched again, his knees creaking. "You came a long way, didn't you?" he asked. Aisha nodded. Her voice was small, and she wasn't sure she trusted it yet. "4 blocks," she said. "From home? That's far for a morning like this," he said. "You're brave." The words sounded too big for her, but they settled in her chest anyway. She wanted to believe them. She stared into the mug, as if the hot chocolate might hold the rest of the sentence she couldn't say. Jack's voice lowered, softer now. "Careful. What brought you here, sweetheart?" Aisha swallowed hard. Her throat felt made of paper. "At school," she said. "They push me. They take my lunch. They say bad words. And after school, there's a car." She drew in a breath that shivered as it went. "A black one." He rolls the window down and smiles, but not like nice people smile. The room stayed quiet. Even the sound of the grill behind the counter seemed to pause. Rosie's hand froze halfway to the napkin holder. Only the clock above the coffee machine dared make a sound, ticking slow and heavy, 1 second at a time. Jack didn't move closer. He stayed where he was, at her level, voice low enough that it didn't bounce off the walls. "What kind of car, Aisha? Do you remember?" She nodded, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Black. Shiny. He has a sticker on the back window. Football. From the high school." She hesitated. "He doesn't know I remembered his plate. I said it in my head over and over. He doesn't know she memorized his plate. With the high school football sticker." Jack's eyes softened, but his jaw set. "You remember it now?" he asked. "Yes. Would you tell me?" She looked at the table. The numbers sat in her mouth, familiar and frightening. She whispered them once, then again, until the air took them. The sound was so small it might have disappeared if the whole room hadn't been listening. Jack repeated the letters and numbers back to her to make sure, slow and even, then nodded once. Around them, the diner seemed to hold its breath. The men at the counter no longer looked like strangers. One of them reached for a pen and wrote the plate on a napkin. Another took out a phone and opened an app, thumbs moving quick. Their faces didn't change much. No anger, no surprise, but something invisible shifted, like a quiet tide turning under the floor. Aisha watched them with wide eyes. The men looked rough, their hands scarred and jackets heavy with patches, but none of that scared her now. It looked like armor. It looked like protection. Rosie moved to the register phone and lifted it from its cradle. Her nails were painted red, chipped on the edges. She dialed quickly, then held the receiver to her ear. After a moment, she nodded toward Jack. "No answer," she said softly. "Try again." Jack turned back to Aisha. "Can I call your mama for you?" he asked. Aisha nodded. Her voice came out as a whisper. She's at home. In the shower, she thinks I'm still sleeping. Jack's brow creased slightly. All right, he said. We'll try again in a minute. He stood up. The other men shifted in quiet coordination. One leaned close and murmured something. Jack nodded. Short and sharp, another man by the window scribbled on his phone, reading back part of what sounded like a license plate. His voice was steady but hard as steel. Aisha didn't know what the words meant, but she felt the room begin to hum, a kind of energy that lived between people when something important had started. Jack crouched again beside her. You said you told the school, he asked. Yes, she said. They said kids are kids, that I should learn to ignore it. The sentence hurt to say. She looked down into her mug again. The marshmallows had disappeared, melted into the chocolate. Her reflection wobbled on the surface. Jack waited a moment, then spoke. They were wrong, he said simply. Rosie set down a plate of toast in front of Aisha, dusted with sugar and cinnamon. Something to help your stomach, she said. Eat slow. Aisha tore off a corner, chewed. The sugar grit melted on her tongue. It didn't fix anything, but it helped her breathe. Behind her, the diner door opened. A burst of cold air carried the smell of wet asphalt. A man in a flour-dusted apron stepped in, froze when he saw the scene, then backed out, letting the door close gently. The bell above the door gave two soft rings. Jack stood and looked toward the men at the counter. Get the others, he said. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Phones lit up across the counter, screens glowing like small suns. Short bursts of talk followed. Numbers, intersections, names of towns Aisha didn't know. Each time, a voice answered on the other end. Copy. Aisha didn't understand the words, but she understood the rhythm, the steady replies, the quiet nods. It was like watching a machine come alive. Not cold metal, but people, all moving with the same heartbeat. One of the men, broad shoulders, hair tied back, looked at her and gave a small nod. Not pity, not curiosity. Promise. Jack returned to the counter. 20 minutes. Someone said, her mother needs to get here. Jack's eyes flicked to Rosie. She was already dialing again. The phone rang only once before someone answered. Aisha heard the faint sound of her mother's voice on the other end. Shaken, small. Despérate. Aisha, where are you? Sweetheart, please. Her mother's words cracked like thin glass. The sound of them made Aisha's own eyes sting. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Rosie placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She's safe, Rosie said gently into the phone. She's with us. Come to Rosie's diner. She's waiting. There was a pause, a rush of breath, then the soft click of the line ending. She's coming, Rosie said. Jack nodded. Good. The minutes stretched and folded. Aisha's heart beat fast, but the rhythm of the diner around her stayed steady. The quiet scrape of cups, the tick of the clock, the far hum of an engine outside. She felt safe here, not the safe that hides under a blanket, but the safe that stands behind something strong. The door opened again. This time it wasn't the sharp ring of the bell, but the heavy sound of a push that didn't wait for permission. A woman stepped in, hair damp, eyes red. The smell of soap and rain clung to her. Tanya's gaze swept the room until it found her daughter. Aisha was already off the stool before she knew she'd moved. She ran, colliding into her mother's chest. Tanya dropped to her knees, arms wrapping tight around her, her breath shuddering into Aisha's hair. Oh, baby, she said. You scared me. You scared me so bad. Aisha couldn't answer. She just pressed her face into her mother's coat, feeling the heartbeat beneath. The world outside the embrace dimmed to muffled sounds, boots shifting, the bell swaying, the soft hiss of the coffee pot. It was enough to know her mother was here. When Tanya finally looked up, her eyes met Jack's. She stood, still holding Aisha's hand. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "You're the one who called." "Yes, ma'am," Jack said. "She's safe now." Tanya nodded, then looked at Aisha again. "She told you about the car." "She did," Jack said. "We have the plate." Her mouth fell open. "I reported it weeks ago. They told me I was seeing things." She let out a short, broken laugh. That wasn't a laugh at all. "They said she was dramatic, that kids exaggerate." Jack's expression didn't change. "We believe her," he said, "and we're going to do something about it." He turned and signaled toward the counter. One of the men retrieved something from under a seat and handed it to him. A small vest, dark purple, soft fabric with silver thread, stitched across the back. He held it out toward Aisha. "For you," he said. "We made this last year for another little one who needed some help. It's yours now." Aisha touched the fabric. It was cool under her fingers. On the back, shining faintly in the diner's neon light, were the words, "Protected by angels." Jack knelt to help her put it on. The vest was a little big, but when the zipper closed, it fit in all the right ways, snug on her shoulders, heavy enough to feel real. The zipper clicked like a promise. Tanya's eyes filled again. "I don't understand," she said. "Who are you?" Jack smiled just slightly. "Riverton Riders," he said. "We ride, and we protect, especially the small one." Outside, an engine started, then another. The sound came first like a heartbeat, then like thunder warming in the distance. Rosie peeked out the window. "They're lining up," she said. Jack checked his watch. Almost 8:30. He set a small purple helmet on the counter beside Aisha. It matched the vest, even had a sticker of a silver wing on the side. "This one's yours too," he said. "It'll fit just fine." Tanya reached for Aisha's hand again, fingers trembling but strong. "You're really going to ride?" Jack nodded. "We'll take her to school. She won't walk alone anymore." Through the window, sunlight caught on chrome and leather. Dozens of bikes gleamed in neat lines. The engines rumbled deeper now, blending into one long voice. The sound vibrated through the diner's floor, through the cups, through Aisha's shoes. It didn't sound frightening. It sounded alive. Jack opened the door. Wind pushed through, bringing the smell of fuel and morning air. He looked at Aisha. "Ready, little Engel?" he asked. Aisha looked up at him, then at her mother. Tanya's face was still pale, but her eyes were steady now. She nodded. "Let's go," she said. Together, they stepped outside. The sunlight spilled over the line of bikes, reflecting off helmets and handlebars, turning the street into a river of silver and black. Somewhere, a flag flapped against the wind, its edges snapping sharp and clean. Jack lifted the helmet and set it gently on Aisha's head. Fastening the strap with a click, the sound felt final, solid. Around them, the riders mounted their bikes, engines rolling into rhythm. Aisha took her mother's hand one last time and smiled, a small, quiet smile that held the tiniest spark of courage. The air trembled as the first engines roared to life. Engines rolled. 8:30. The engines outside hummed like a living wall. The vibrations slipped through the windows, across the diner floor, and into Aisha's chest. She stood at the door, helmet in hand, her purple vest snug around her shoulders. The air smelled of fuel, rain, and the faint sweetness of Rosie's toast still cooling on the counter. Behind her, her mother's hand rested lightly on her back, not pushing, not pulling, just there, the way a doorframe stands steady while you step through. Jack looked over his shoulder once, then opened the diner door fully. The cold morning air spilled in, mixed with the warmth, and everything changed temperature at once. The sound outside was not chaos. It was rhythm. Hundreds of engines, all breathing together, steady and low. Chrome flashed like ripples across a black sea. Every mirror caught a shard of the sun and tossed it back. Aisha hesitated for a single heartbeat. Then Jack's voice came from beside her, calm and even. "You ready?" "Little angle." She nodded. The movement was small, but it carried weight. Jack's gloved hand motioned toward the center of the street, where a row of bikes waited. Each one gleamed as if it had been washed by the rain and polished by the dawn. Riders sat upright. Jackets sipped, patches catching the light. Riverton riders, stitched across every back. Aisha didn't know what chapter meant when Jack said it earlier, but now she thought maybe this was it. A story big enough that everyone could fit inside. Her mother crouched and tightened the strap on Aisha's vest, tugging gently. "Stay close to him," she whispered. "You'll be safe." Aisha squeezed her mother's hand once before, stepping toward Jack. He crouched, lifted her easily onto the seat in front of him, and handed her the small purple helmet. The padding smelled faintly of leather and something clean. When she put it on, the world softened. Sounds grew deep, like hearing through water. She could still feel the hum of the engines, but it was inside her now, part of her heartbeat. Jack's voice came through the helmet, close and low, hands on the tank, feet on the pegs. "You'll feel the road, but it won't hurt you." She placed her palms flat on the tank's cool surface, her reflection curved in the metal, small and clear. Her braids framed her face like question marks, but the eyes staring back looked steadier than she remembered. Jack looked to the side and raised 2 fingers. The signal moved down the line like a wave of trust. Engines shifted tone, not louder, just unified. The sound was enormous but patient, the kind of power that waited for permission to move. Jack pressed the starter once more. The bike answered, with a deep, chest-filling growl. Aisha's shoulders lifted, then settled. She could feel his breath behind her through the vibration of the seat. The first bikes rolled forward. Tires whispered on wet asphalt. The line curved around the diner, each pair moving in rhythm. Jack eased the throttle. The bike glided ahead, slow enough for Aisha to count the cracks in the pavement as they passed. The diner shrank behind her, but she could still see Rosie in the window, holding her mug in both hands. Rosie nodded once, a small benediction. Then the glass reflected sunlight, and she was gone. They turned the corner. The world opened. Aisha had never seen the town from this high, this open. Storefronts blurred. Baba shop, bakery, the church with its faded cross. A mailman froze on the sidewalk. Letters halfway to a box. A woman with a stroller stopped, eyes wide. Somewhere, a man whistled, not out of mockery but disbelief. Kids by a bus stop raised their phone. Aisha saw her own reflection flash back from their screens, a small figure in purple and chrome, surrounded by thunder. She thought she might be afraid of all the noise, but the noise didn't scare her. It protected her. It filled all the empty space where fear used to live. Jack leaned close enough for her to hear. "Doing okay?" She nodded, though he couldn't see. "Yes," she said, her voice tiny inside the helmet. "It's like the world is breathing." Jack chuckled once. "That's about right." The convoy moved down Main Street. People came out of shops, some waving, some just staring. The sunlight hit every mirror at once and scattered into 100 small suns. The flags on the bikes lifted in unison. Aisha's mother's car followed just behind, keeping pace, her face visible through the windshield, tense but proud. Every few seconds, she lifted her hand, palm forward. The signal Aisha knew meant, "I'm here." They passed the grocery store. Aisha remembered holding her mother's hand in that same parking lot. When the black car first appeared, the memory flashed in her chest like a cold spark. She looked around now, searching, and saw only reflections of riders, chrome, and open road. For the first time, that corner did not belong to fear. At the next light, the lead bike slowed. The riders stopped as one. Jack's left foot hit the ground. The sound of 200 engines idling together filled the street like thunder, learning patience. A child in the back seat of a minivan pressed both hands to the glass and grinned. Aisha lifted one hand from the tank, just for a moment, and waved. The boy's mouth formed a perfect circle of awe. His mother stared too, but she smiled when she saw the small purple helmet. It was the kind of smile that meant the world had just changed shape a little. The light turned green. Jack shifted, smooth and sure. The bikes rolled forward again. Aisha counted the seconds between each breath. One inhale, one exhale. The rhythm matched the road. The closer they came to the school, the more the world leaned in to watch. Teachers paused at crosswalks. A group of teenagers stood on the curb, phones up, jaws slack. The air itself seemed to hush when the convoy turned the final corner. The school stood ahead, brick and shadow and glass. The flag above it was still. The parking lot stretched wide, half full of cars, ordinary, silent cars, until the line of motorcycles filled the entrance like a tide that had been waiting for the right moon. Jack slowed to a crawl. His voice came again, lower than before. "You did it," he said. 4 blocks. And now the whole town knows. Aisha swallowed. She wanted to look brave, but her heart had started to pound again. Not from fear, from weight, from knowing that the quiet inside her was now something people could hear from streets away. They stopped just outside the main gate. The roar tapered down to a purr, then to a hum, then to the soft ticking of cooling engines. Jack cut the ignition. Silence folded itself over the parking lot like a blanket still humming from heat. Aisha turned her head slowly. Children were frozen at the fence, staring. Teachers stood by the doors, hands half raised, unsure whether to wave or call security. Her mother parked beside them, stepping out before the car had stopped moving. She came to Aisha's side and helped her off the bike. The world tilted once as her boots met the pavement, then steadied. The air felt thinner here. Aisha lifted her visor. The smell of asphalt and gasoline mixed with the faint scent of freshly cut grass from the field beyond. She could taste metal on her tongue. Jack dismounted. The other riders spread out across the curb in a silent semicircle, not blocking anyone, not advancing, just there, like statues that had decided to breathe. Aisha looked toward the entrance. Tyler stood near the bike rack. His backpack hung from one shoulder. The usual smirk on his face was gone. His eyes flicked from the rows of bikes to the purple vest, to Jack towering behind her. His lips parted, but no words came. He stepped back once, then again, until the heel of his shoe hit the fence post. He stopped moving after that. Jack noticed the boy but said nothing. He simply adjusted his gloves and turned toward Aisha. The sun caught the patch on his back, the one that said Riverton Riders, and threw the reflection straight into Tyler's eyes. Tyler flinched. Jack didn't look again. Aisha's mother reached down and squeezed her shoulder. "You ready to go in?" Aisha nodded. Her knees wobbled once but held. The school doors looked smaller than she remembered. She could hear the faint clatter of lockers inside. The bell waiting to ring. Jack crouched one last time beside her. "You know what the vest says?" he asked. She looked down at the silver stitching across her chest. "Protected by angels." He smiled. "That's right. You wear it. And remember, angels can look like anything, sometimes leather and sometimes laughter." Aisha smiled back. Then she turned toward the steps. The world behind her hummed. 200 engines, quiet but alive, waiting. As she took her first step toward the entrance, something shifted in the edge of her vision. Across the street, beyond the row of bikes and cars, a black sedan sat idling. It wasn't parked in the school lot. It was angled just wrong, just watching. The tinted windows showed nothing. No driver, no passenger. Only a faint reflection of the morning sun, bending against glass too dark for daylight to enter. Aisha's heartbeat skipped. The sound of engines filled her again, but this time it wasn't noise. It was armor. Jack straightened behind her. He followed her gaze, then lowered his voice to the men nearest him. They didn't move fast, just shifted weight, the way mountains might lean before a storm. Aisha turned back to the door. She took another step. The shadow of the black car stayed where it was, small and far and temporary. The door ahead opened. The sound of the engines behind her deepened once, like a collective exhale. She walked inside. Engines rumbled like a storm held politely at the edge of town. Aisha stood at the foot of the school steps. Her helmet tucked under her arm, her purple vest glowing faintly in the morning light. The air was filled with the scent of fuel and cold metal, the kind of air that seemed to hum inside her bones. Around here, the line of riders had stopped, their bikes angled perfectly, chrome catching sunlight in fractured sparks. It wasn't loud anymore. It was alive, breathing, waiting. Her mother's hand hovered at her shoulder, steady but not heavy. "Go on, sweetheart," she whispered. "They're all right here." Aisha nodded once. She didn't speak. Words felt too small to hold what the morning was doing. The sound of her boots on the pavement was soft compared to the deep pulse of the engines. When she lifted her head, the front doors of the school looked taller than they ever had, as if the building itself was surprised to see her arrive this way. The crowd along the fence had grown. Teachers stood frozen near the gate. Students gathered in small clusters, whispering, phones tilted upward. Filming. Aisha didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the steps, one after another, a rhythm she could control. She thought of what Jack had said. "We go together. They go slow." That rhythm kept her breathing even behind her. Jack dismounted and stood, his boots settling on the asphalt. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough, the quiet shape of a man whose silence carried weight. The other riders fanned out behind him, not blocking anyone, not showing force. They just stood, the sunlight flashing on their patches. Riverton Riders. The town name curved like a banner across their backs. Aisha felt their presence even without turning. It was like having a wall made of warmth instead of bricks. She took the first step. The sound of her shoe echoed softly. Then another, then another. Each one was easier. At the top of the stairs, her reflection stretched across the glass door. Small, but centered, a tiny point of color in a world of gray. And then she saw him, Tyler, standing near the bike racks, his backpack hanging loose, his jaw tight. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even sneering. His face looked confused, as if the ground beneath him had changed shape while he wasn't looking. His eyes darted from Aisha to the riders, to Jack standing tall behind her, and back again. When his gaze reached the silver thread on her vest, protected by angels, it stopped. He blinked once, twice. Then the expression broke. The corners of his mouth twitched, not upward but downward, and his stare fell to the ground. Aisha felt something lift off her shoulders, a weight she hadn't known how to name until it was gone. A movement to her right caught her eye. One of the riders, a tall man with a shaved head and dark glasses, stepped closer to Tyler. He didn't loom or threaten. He simply crouched until their eyes were level. His lips moved, just a few words that didn't carry to Aisha's ears. Tyler's hands clenched the straps of his backpack, knuckles white. Then he nodded once, a small, sharp nod, like someone agreeing with gravity. The rider stood, gave him a slow, respectful pat on the shoulder, and walked away. No one laughed, no one cheered, but the silence that followed felt heavier than applause. Aisha reached the top step. The teacher at the door, Mrs. Green, had tears shining in her eyes. She held the door open with both hands. "Come in, honey," she said quietly. "You're safe here." Safe. The word tasted new. Aisha turned once more toward the parking lot. Jack met her Gaza, the faintest smile behind the shadow of his beard. He didn't wave, he just nodded, one slow dip of his chin, as if to say, "You did it." The riders around him straightened in unison, a field of motionless guardian. Aisha lifted her visor, just enough to breathe in the air. It smelled of oil and spring and something else, something clean. Her mother squeezed her shoulder, whispering, "I'm proud of you." Inside, the hallway waited, long and bright, lockers gleaming like Kiat sentinels. But Aisha lingered one heartbeat longer, something tugging at the corner of her sight. Across the street, behind a row of cars, a shape caught the light. A black sedan. It wasn't parked where the others were. It sat half hidden by the hedge, angled toward the road. The windows were tinted so dark they swallowed the morning. Sunlight bounced off the windshield and slid away. The car didn't move. It just waited. Her stomach tightened. She recognized the way it tilted, the slight lean to one side. The same kind of car. Maybe the same one. Jack followed her gaze. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders shifted just enough for the riders nearby to notice. Two of them glanced up, subtle as wind, eyes flicking toward the street. No one said a word. The engines stayed silent, but their weight filled the air like a promise. Aisha turned back toward the doorway. The teacher stepped aside. Her mother guided her through the threshold, hands steady at her back. The glass door closed behind them with a quiet thud, sealing the noise of the outside world into something distant, muffled, but still alive. Inside, everything was smaller, the hum of fluorescent lights, the scent of pencil shavings and floor wax, the tick of the hallway clock. But underneath all of it, she could still feel the engines through the soles of her shoes. Vibrations crawling up from the ground like a heartbeat, echoing from the pavement itself. Her mother went to sign the register at the office window. Aisha stood near the door, watching through the glass panels. The world outside had turned into a moving picture. Riders spreading out along the curb, parents filming, teachers peering from the windows. A man near the hedge crouched, picking something off the ground. It caught the light, a sticker, round and shiny, torn at one edge, the same football logo she had described. The rider examined it briefly, then slipped it into his pocket, careful as if he were tucking away evidence. Proof could glow. Aisha thought. She hadn't known that before. Her mother returned, eyes softer now. "Ready?" she asked. Aisha nodded. She glanced once more through the glass. The black sedan was still there, idling, its mirrors angled wrong. One of the riders had stepped closer to the street, helmet under his arm, gaze steady on the car. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as if bored by being watched, the sedan rolled backward, turned its wheel, and drifted away down the block. The tension in Aisha's chest loosened. The sound of the engines outside softened again, more like breathing than thunder. She could finally exhale. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Let's get to class," she said. Aisha smiled beneath the helmet. The visor fogged briefly, then cleared. Together, they walked down the bright hallway, the echo of the engines following like a quiet rhythm she could trust. Outside, the riders held their line, sunlight gleaming off the chrome. Jack stayed where he was, watching the last trace of the black car disappear around the corner. He didn't chase it. He didn't need to. He knew where this story was going now. And inside, Aisha took her seat at her desk, the purple vest still zipped, the silver thread catching the morning light through the window. The engines outside kept humming, a reminder, a heartbeat, a promise that she was no longer alone. The door thumped softly behind Aisha and turned the morning into something she could watch through glass. The fluorescent lights above sang a thin, bright line, and underneath it, she could still feel the low, steady breath of engines through the soles of her shoes. Her mother spoke with the woman at the office window, papers sliding, a pen scratching, the tidy sound of ink, agreeing to stay. Aisha stood at the vestibule pane and let the parking lot become a moving picture she could read without hearing. The riders had not scattered. They had arranged themselves into calm. Two stepped off the curb and crossed the stripes toward the far corner, where a black sedan waited half-hidden behind the hedge and the dark window of an insurance office. The car sat wrong, nose angled toward escape, windows tinted so deep they turned sunlight into nothing. Leaves at the hedge lifted and settled. The car did not. Aisha adjusted the strap under her chin and loosened her shoulders. The helmet made sound feel near. Voices outside were only shapes of voices, carried in the set of shoulders, and the way hands opened or closed. The two riders stopped 3 careful steps from the driver's door. That distance looked like a rule written on the pavement. One rider lifted a phone, not high, not to film, just enough to look. Morning light skimmed the glass and paused there, a brief shine like the top of a marshmallow before it melts. He glanced from screen to plate and back to screen. Aisha could not see words, only the oval of a sticker and the curve of numbers she had kept like beads on a string inside her mouth. She pressed her palm to the purple vest and felt the silver thread under her hand, stitch by small stitch, like braille for courage. Inside, her mother said Aisha's name to the registrar without apology or question mark. The name stood up and held its own weight. Aisha stayed with the lot. The driver's window slid down in a clean, dark line. Even through the pain and the helmet, she felt the cold push of air conditioning spill into the morning. A cap brim, sunglasses, the square set of a jaw. The older boy, the broadness across the shoulders that made sense of why he felt like a shadow even when he sat still. The nearer rider rested an elbow lightly on the lowered glass. Not a challenge, just the way a man leans on a fence when he asks for a landmark. The second rider stood off the front quarter panel, leaving space for the car to move if it chose to behave. No one pointed. No one waved. Brake lights brightened. Dimmed. Brightened. Aisha could not hear the words. She watched the conversation land in muscles. The small tilt of a head, the slow set of a mouth, the flex and release of fingers on a wheel. The rider with the phone turned the screen a fraction. The reflection flashed white. And then, for the briefest breath, she saw it clearly enough to know she had not imagined anything during the nights. She did not sleep. The football sticker, the line of letters, the time mark tucked like a seed in the corner of the image. Proof could glow. The thought clicked into place and stayed. Her mother came to stand beside her, and for a moment they looked out together like the glass was a page and the street was a sentence. Her mother's hand found Aisha's shoulder and rested there, warm and measured. They watched the boy in the car look past the two riders at the long line of parked bikes and the quiet faces beyond. Parents on the sidewalk held their phones like lanterns rather than weapons. A woman in a blue sweater pressed her free hand to her mouth and did not lower it when tears rose. She breathed through her fingers and kept filming because the moment required both. Outside, the nearer rider stepped back one pace. A narrow path offered. The boy's eyes twitched. The brake light lifted to bright, and the sedan eased backward a little, straightened, and slipped along the side street with the studied calm of someone choosing not to run. The hedge leaves shivered and fell still again. Aisha exhaled. Fog wrote a soft oval on the inside of her visor and vanished. She had not known her shoulders were close to her ears until they fell. No one chased the car. The rider with the phone slipped the device into a pocket and bent toward the gutter as if a small idea had tapped his boot. He lifted something thin between two fingers, a sticker curled at one edge, the same oval logo bright on the clean side. grit smudging the other. He turned it once like a coin and tucked it into his vest with the care people give to fragile things that matter in courtrooms and kitchens. From the corner came the steady cough of a van downshifting. A white vehicle rolled to the curb and stopped as if it had been invited. The side door slid open with a rubbery sigh. Tripod feet touched asphalt in a series of careful clicks. A coil of cable tumbled and then straightened, black and patient. A camera climbed a shoulder. A small red eye blinked awake, tried the morning, and decided to stay. The office door clicked on its latch. A teacher pushed a clipboard toward the registrar and pulled back when a rubber stamp came down with a neat thock that sounded like a door locking in the right direction. Outside, a microphone lifted. The wind combed the foam cover. Parents edged forward, not shoving, not jostling, only moving toward a frame that would finally hold what they had been carrying in private. A mother held her bag high on her chest and spoke with her chin tucked as if privacy could survive honesty for a few seconds more. A father lifted his own phone and tilted the screen so the camera could drink the rectangle of image and the small block of time data in the corner. The red eye burned steadily, a tiny stove warming the cold part of the morning. The engines outside softened to a protective purr that lived under every other sound. Aisha could pick out 3 notes at once: the bass of the bikes, the squeak of a dolly wheel rolling over a sidewalk seam, the thin metal tick of a cooling tailpipe somewhere along the line. She marked them, and the marking calmed her. Her name surfaced at the edge of someone else's sentence and fell into the air without wobbling. She did not flinch. Her mother's fingers tightened and released in a rhythm that matched the engines as if her hand had learned a new metronome. Near the bike rack, the boys who had been taller than her for so long seemed shorter by the size of one decision. Tyler kept his eyes on the asphalt like it might tell him what to do if he stared politely. A rider passed near him without stopping, and the boy's throat moved when he swallowed. The way a person swallows when a lie dries out of the mouth and leaves room for something else. Aisha felt no heat in her chest for him, only the specific lightness that arrives when a door you have braced with your whole body finally stays shut because someone fixed the hinge. Her mother's name was called at the window for one more signature. The pen rasped again. The registrar slid a laminated tag across and retrieved it when the stamp dried. Outside, the rider who had pocketed the sticker handed a folded napkin to another rider. The second unfolded it, read the numbers, written in careful block letters, and nodded. The nod looked exactly like a key turning. The van's rear doors shut with a hollow clap. A cable popped into a port with a satisfying click. The reporter touched her earpiece, moved a parent half a step to the left so the school sign would sit cleanly in the over-shoulder, and lowered the microphone by an inch to let the voice be the loudest part of the frame. Courtesy made the picture sharper. The red tally light held, steady and small and stubborn. Aisha turned her head and checked the hallway clock without meaning to. The second hand climbed and set its foot on the next mark. Everything felt aligned for a breath. The tick, the purr, the tiny squeak of a stroller wheel as it bumped the curb cut, the hush of the door as a teacher cracked it to listen and then closed it respectfully again. Her mother knelt, zipped the little inner pocket of Aisha's backpack, and touched her cheek with 2 fingers. "I will be here before the last bell," she said, voice steady. "They will be here." She did not look toward the riders when she said they. She did not have to. Aisha pressed her palm to the glass one more time. The pain felt cool and exact, and it showed her the lot without distorting it too much. The black sedan was gone. In its place was the geometry of presence, bikes in a curve like an arm around a shoulder, cameras aimed like eyes, that would not shut. Parents stepping forward to put words in a line for everyone to see. The inner door opened on a corridor of light. An aide smiled with her whole face and held the door wider than necessary. Aisha walked through with her mother beside her to the corner, then on her own the last few steps, letting her shoulder brush the classroom doorway like a boat kissing a dock. She slid into her seat, set the small plastic stegosaurus on the tray, with its head angled toward the window, and flattened a page with the side of her hand. The blue lines waited, even and kind. She glanced out one more time. The camera's red eye burned calmly. A parent angled a phone to offer an image. The camera leaned closer and caught the numbers tucked in the corner like truth being domestic and patient. A rider stepped aside to let a stroller through. The wheels clicked twice over the seam in the sidewalk and rolled on. The engines lifted their tone by the width of one breath. Not warning, just reminder. The reporter nodded and began again. The red light held. Something in Aisha's chest unlocked with a soft click she could almost hear. Proof was not just a thing you dragged to an office and begged to be believed. Proof could stand in sunlight and blink. She lowered her pencil to the waiting line. Outside, the parking lot prepared to tell the truth out loud, and the engines beneath it all kept breathing in time with her. The hum of the classroom had changed. It was no longer just the quiet rhythm of pencils and pages, but something heavier beneath the floor. A heartbeat from the world outside. Aisha sat very still, eyes on the blank lines of her notebook, pretending to read the instructions written there. She wasn't writing anymore. She was listening. Through the window, beyond the muted light, the parking lot was alive. The red tally light of the camera glowed like a pulse in the morning air. Microphones hovered above small crowds of parents. The riders stood motionless behind them, and the teachers who had once kept everyone quiet now simply watched. The sound from outside was muffled, distorted by glass, but Aisha could still feel the words in her chest. Anger, relief, proof. Her teacher paced quietly along the rows, handing out worksheets no one wanted. When she reached Aisha's desk, she hesitated, then set the page down gently. Aisha didn't look up. Her hand stayed on the purple vest, tracing the embroidered wings with the tip of her thumb. The thread caught the light from the window, a soft shimmer that felt like breath. Outside, a mother spoke first. Her voice wavered, but her words did not. Aisha couldn't hear them clearly, but she saw how the woman's shoulders trembled and how she gripped her purse like something alive. Next to her, a man lifted his phone, the screen flashing white as the camera operator zoomed in. The man pointed at something, a photo, maybe, and Aisha could just make out the corner of an image. A black sedan, a timestamp in bold white numbers. 10:28, 70 and 42. She mouthed the numbers to herself. Proof could glow. It had once been trapped in her head, and now it was shining on a stranger's phone in front of cameras. The principal appeared at the top of the steps, clutching a folder. His face was pale and thin, and his tie had turned sideways like it was trying to escape. He raised one hand as though calming a classroom, but no one stopped. The words he tried to shape didn't reach far. The microphones were already facing the parents, the phones already recording their stories. His voice disappeared into the hum of it all. For the first time, the sound of authority was smaller than the sound of truth. Aisha saw her mother near the curb. She stood with her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the principal. Every few seconds, her lips moved, and though Aisha couldn't hear her, she knew the rhythm of those sentences, the same rhythm she used when she told Aisha to speak clearly, to not shrink herself for anyone, the same rhythm she used the night before when she whispered, "It wasn't your fault." One of the riders, Ghost, stood a little apart from the crowd. He wasn't moving, just watching, his hands clasped behind his back. Jack was closer to the front, still and steady, the weight of him quiet but undeniable. No one told the parents what to say. No one interrupted. It was as if the whole town had decided to breathe at the same time. Aisha's pencil rolled and fell into the crack beside her desk. She let it stay there. Her heartbeat had found a rhythm with the engines outside. It was slow, patient, deliberate. Each vibration that reached her feet reminded her that this moment was real, not a dream she would wake from in her small room with the lights off. The reporter moved closer to the steps. The camera followed, red light, unblinking. A woman in a blue sweater spoke now. She held a folded piece of paper in both hands and read from it, though her voice broke halfway through. Another parent stepped forward, showing a photo of a bruise on a child's arm. A caption, a date. The reporter nodded, and the microphone dipped lower. Even without hearing, Aisha understood what was being said. It was the same story, just told by different mouths. The principal shifted, his hands gripped the folder tighter. He tried again to speak, gesturing toward the crowd, but the wind picked up and carried his words away. The pages inside his folder fluttered like they were trying to leave. He turned toward the school doors, but they stayed shut. He wasn't in charge anymore. The air didn't listen to him. A car's engine turned the corner, not loud, controlled. A silver badge caught the sun for an instant. The crowd moved aside without being told. A black sedan rolled to a stop in front of the steps. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Dark suit, hair tied back, shoes that struck the ground like punctuation. She carried a case in one hand, a badge clipped to her belt. The letters FBI glinted once before she closed her coat. Jack stepped forward, meeting her halfway. He handed her a folded napkin. Aisha recognized it, the same one that had passed from hand to hand that morning. The woman took it without looking down, then unfolded it once. Her expression didn't change, but her body stilled. She slipped the napkin into a clear plastic sleeve and tucked it into her case. Aisha didn't need to hear to know what that meant. The proof was now official. The reporter turned, camera following, red tally light flaring brighter. The crowd hushed, not out of fear, but out of gravity. The principal froze halfway down the steps, caught between leaving and explaining. The woman in the dark suit said something to Jack. Short, precise. He nodded. Then she looked toward the school, toward the window where Aisha sat, and for the first time, her face softened, just a fraction. Aisha straightened in her chair. Their eyes met through layers of glass and air and distance. The woman's nod was small but unmistakable. A promise, maybe, or gratitude. Then she turned away and spoke into the small device clipped to her collar. Aisha saw her mouth form the words, "Plate confirmed." Inside the classroom, the air felt heavier but cleaner. The students had gone quiet. Even the teacher stopped pretending to grade papers. Outside, everything moved in deliberate silence. The woman, Agent Reyes, Aisha would learn later, set her case on the hood of her car and pulled out a stack of papers. The top sheet flapped in the breeze for a moment before her hand pressed it flat. Sunlight caught the black print of a name, and though Aisha couldn't read it from here, she knew it belonged to the man in the car she'd seen all week. Her mother looked up at the school window then, as if she could feel Aisha watching. Their eyes met for a second, long enough for Aisha to know that she wasn't just part of this story. She had started it. The fear that used to sit in her stomach like a stone had become something steadier, something that could stand. The principal stepped back from the steps, folder trembling in his hand. Pages slipped free, fluttering across the concrete like pale birds. He stooped to grab them, but the wind scattered them further. The crowd didn't move. The camera followed the papers as they landed at the feet of the riders. One sheet caught against a boot and stayed there. The man didn't kick it away. Agent Reyes raised the first page of her file and showed it to the nearest camera. The red tally light reflected against the paper, making it glow red for an instant. Proof. Again, shining where everyone could see it. Then she said something into her radio. Short and final. Aisha couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She knew the sound of a lock turning when she saw one. She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind carried the echo of voices, microphones, and engines. Inside, she heard her teacher's voice softly ask the class to open their books. Aisha opened hers, but her eyes stayed on the window. The last thing she saw before the sedan door closed again was Agent Reyes placing her badge on the hood beside the papers. It caught the light, and for a moment, it looked like a small piece of the sun had decided to stay. The sound outside changed first. The quiet engines became a single low note, steady as a heartbeat. Aisha stayed at her desk, her hands folded on the vest, tracing the silver thread that still shimmered faintly in the sunlight. It was warm against her skin, a reminder of protection that did not need to be spoken aloud. She lifted her eyes toward the window, toward the woman in the dark suit. Agent Reyes stood by the unmarked car, the black fabric of her jacket pulling tight as she opened her case again. The papers inside looked almost ordinary, white, crisp, perfectly aligned, but the air around them shifted when she set them down. The top page caught a streak of light, and for a second the word warrant glowed faintly before she flattened it with the side of her hand. The camera near the curb adjusted, its red light steady. Everyone outside leaned closer. Without meaning to, Jack remained by the steps. His arms were loose at his sides, his stance unchanging. When Reyes turned her head slightly, he reached into his pocket and drew out the folded napkin, the same one that had traveled hand to hand since morning. He passed it to her quietly. She didn't need to ask what it was. She slid it into a transparent sleeve, pressed the seal shut, and placed it on top of the papers on the hood. A click followed, small and final. It sounded like the end of a lock turning. The principal stood 2 steps above the rest, his folder clutched to his chest like a shield that was already cracked. The veins in his hand stood out pale blue against his skin. No one looked at him. Parents kept their focus on the woman with the papers. Teachers near the doors waited without moving. For the first time, silence did not belong to fear. It belonged to attention. Reyes lifted her radio, pressing it close to her mouth. Aisha could not hear the words, but she saw the effect ripple outward. One of the riders straightened, a parent nodded to another. A sound technician tightened his grip on the microphone. The papers stayed in place under Rhea's hand as she spoke. When she was done, she paused for one breath, lifted her fingers, and looked directly at the camera lens. Aisha leaned closer to the glass. The woman tilted the page so the camera could read a line of print, letters, numbers, a seal. The words were too small for Aisha to make out, but the shape of them was unmistakable. It was the language of authority, neat and unbreakable. Proof did not just shine, it carried weight. Her mother stood a few feet behind Jack, her face still, her shoulders squared. She wasn't afraid anymore. The principal shifted again, the folder sliding a little in his grip. One page slipped loose, fluttering down the steps like a white leaf. He bent to pick it up, missed, and let it go. The paper landed near a rider's boot and stayed there. Inside, the classroom felt suspended. The teacher had stopped writing on the board. The chalk rested against the tray. None of the students spoke. The light from the window cut a pale stripe across Aisha's desk, touching the corner of her notebook. She reached for her pencil, then stopped halfway. Her fingers wanted to remember this quiet, to keep it exactly as it was before it changed again. Outside, Reyes drew a small tablet from her case. The screen lit her face briefly, a cold glow under the sun. She turned it toward Jack for a second, then angled it so the nearest camera could capture part of it. The red light pulsed once. Aisha imagined the message on that screen. Official and short. A command, not a request. The kind that ended waiting. The principal stepped down another stair. Trying to gather the pieces of his voice, his lips moved. No sound reached through the glass. But Aisha could tell the shape of apology from the way his head bent forward. The crowd didn't respond. They didn't shout or cheer. They just watched. Reyes did not acknowledge him. She picked up the warrant and laid her badge beside it on the hood. Metal touching paper. It was a small gesture, deliberate and clear. The law had arrived, and it was not leaving. The seal on the page gleamed once in the sun. The badge reflected the same light back. Between them sat the truth, balanced and heavy. A pair of uniformed officers appeared at the far edge of the lot, walking toward the steps. Their movements were measured, precise, unhurried. No one announced them. No one had to. They came the way gravity comes, quiet, inevitable. The crowd parted without instruction. The parents moved back, forming a narrow aisle that led straight to the principal. Reyes watched them approach, her hand still on the papers. She said something short into her radio. One of the riders nodded faintly, shifting his stance. The officers reached the bottom of the stairs, stopped, and waited for her signal. She gave it with a simple nod. That was enough. The principal's shoulders sagged. The folder slipped again, this time falling completely. Papers scattered around his shoes, caught in the morning breeze. He didn't bend to pick them up. He just looked at the badge on the car hood, the seal on the paper, the camera lights reflecting from both. Whatever words he might have had were gone. The silence accepted him, and then it moved past him. Reyes closed the case halfway to keep the documents from lifting, then looked toward the crowd. Her gaze passed over the riders, over the parents, over the teachers, and landed on the school windows. She found Aisha's face. For a heartbeat they looked at each other through the layers of air and glass and distance. The nod that followed was slight, but it carried something whole. Recognition, perhaps gratitude, but mostly truth. It was done. Aisha's chest felt lighter and heavier at the same time. She pressed her palm flat against the desk, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers. Through the window, the officers were guiding the principal down the last few steps, not touching him, only walking beside him. He didn't resist. He didn't look back. The papers he'd dropped stayed behind, bright against the dark pavement. Reyes lifted her badge from the hood, clipped it back to her belt, and gathered the documents into the case. When she shut it, the latch clicked once, a sound that echoed faintly through the glass. Aisha knew the sound immediately. It was the sound of a lock finding its place. Inside, the teacher let out a small breath. The class seemed to exhale with her. Someone coughed quietly. The noise felt almost sacred. Aisha reached down, picked up her pencil, and placed it carefully in the groove of her desk. The vest against her skin felt lighter now, not armor but memory. Outside, Reyes spoke into her radio again. The officers led the principal toward a waiting car. The crowd remained silent. No one clapped. No one shouted. The absence of noise was not emptiness. It was respect. The engines that had hummed all morning shifted back to idle, steady, and low. A sound like the earth breathing again. Through the reflection in the glass, Aisha caught a glimpse of herself. Small, still, eyes wide but calm. Behind her reflection, the badge on the car flashed once more before disappearing as the sun moved. The case closed. The papers were gone. The woman in the dark suit turned away from the camera and started walking toward the street. Aisha let the air out of her lungs in a long, slow sigh. The sound mixed with the engines, the hum, the quiet voices outside. When she breathed in again, it felt cleaner. Something had shifted. Something had been unfastened. The lock had turned. The sound that filled the morning had changed its shape again. It was no longer the low growl of engines waiting, or the sharp snap of microphones catching statements. It was steady, wide, almost musical, the kind of hum that comes from something complete. Aisha sat at her desk with her palm on the window, feeling it vibrate faintly against her skin. The glass was cool, but underneath it there was warmth, the shared rhythm of 200 engines idling in harmony before they moved. Agent Reyes stood beside the unmarked car, speaking into a small radio. Her words didn't reach the classroom, but the tone of her movements did. Clean, purposeful, final. She turned once toward the cameras, her expression composed. Then she closed the car door, the sound carrying like a period at the end of a long sentence. The cameras stayed on her even after she had stepped back, unwilling to let the story go. Jack stood on the steps of the school, his jacket dusted with the morning light. The napkin that had carried the evidence now rested somewhere safe. A duty finished. Rosie had appeared at the edge of the crowd, holding a cup of coffee like a medal. She offered it to Jack. He accepted it with a nod and a small, tired smile that Aisha could feel through the window, even if she couldn't see his eyes. The air around the school changed. Parents shifted from tight circles into looser ones. Conversations began, low, cautious, then frayer. Some of them pointed at the news vans. Others looked toward the horizon, where the street curved away. The tension that had held them all in one shape slowly loosened its grip. Jack lifted a hand toward Ghost and the riders. The gesture was simple, but every head turned to follow it. The rumble of engines swelled slightly, not in aggression but in agreement. Aisha saw the tiny tremor of sunlight sliding across the helmets. Silver, black, and chrome moving as one. He drew the key from his pocket. The motion was deliberate. Slow. He held it up once, the metal catching the light like a small flame. For a moment, the entire courtyard froze around that gesture. The cameras, the parents, even the air. Then he lowered his arm, slipping the key back into his jacket. It was enough. The signal had been given. Engines answered, not all at once, but in waves, a deep rolling sound that started at the front and rippled down the line. It wasn't the roar of arrival anymore. It was the pulse of release. The vibration deepened, layered and rich, like thunder that knew it didn't need to strike again. Aisha felt it under her feet, up the legs of the desk, through the wood, into her fingertips. It felt like the sound of the world taking its next step. Her mother came to stand beside her. The woman's reflection appeared first, then her hand on Aisha's shoulder. Together, they looked out at the moving line. The bikers turned one by one onto the street, each maintaining a perfect distance from the next. The roar softened into rhythm, the rhythm into music, the music into distance. Aisha could tell the difference between the engine notes now, some low and rough, some light and high. It was like a choir she didn't know she had been waiting to hear. One of the smaller riders at the back waved a gloved hand toward the classroom windows. Aisha lifted her palm in return, pressing it to the glass. The rider might not have seen, but she didn't mind. The gesture was more for her than for anyone else. It was her way of saying thank you without words. Outside, Rosie adjusted her apron and turned back toward the diner across the street. The crowd began to break apart. Parents hugged each other, some crying, some laughing through the tears. The reporter folded her microphone cable neatly, the red tally light on her camera blinking twice before fading to black. Agent Reyes's car rolled slowly away, its tires whispering across the asphalt. Aisha watched it until the taillights disappeared behind the row of maples. Inside the classroom, the teacher spoke softly, telling the children to take out their notebooks. The ordinary sound of paper rustling filled the room, tender and tentative. It felt strange to Aisha that life could return so quickly after standing still for so long. But maybe that was the point. Maybe normal was not the opposite of courage, but its reward. She looked down at her own notebook. The page she had left open earlier was still blank, except for the faint shadow of her hand pressed against it. The graphite from her pencil had left a smudge near the top corner. She turned the page, letting the new one fall open, clean and white. Her mother leaned closer, whispering through the small crack in the door. "It's all right now." Aisha nodded but didn't look away from the paper. She wasn't sure what to write yet. Words felt too small for everything that had happened outside that window. Through the glass, she could still see the curve of the street where the last riders disappeared. The sound of their engines grew thinner, lighter, until it was no more than the echo of air. Aisha thought of how that sound had once frightened her, the growl that had followed her home, the hum that made her shrink into shadows. Now it was a sound she wanted to remember. It wasn't danger anymore. It was proof that help could have a voice. She traced one finger along the window frame, feeling the faint tremor that remained, the last hum of the convoy moving farther and farther away. The building itself seemed to sigh, as if the walls had been holding their breath too. The morning sun, stronger now, poured through the glass and laid a rectangle of light across her desk. It touched her vest, making the purple thread shimmer like a small promise renewed. Jack stood at the corner for a few more seconds, watching the line of bikes vanish into the horizon. He finished the last sip of coffee Rosie had given him, then crushed the paper cup lightly in one hand and dropped it into the bin. His shoulders loosened. For the first time that day, he looked less like a guard and more like a man simply standing in the morning air. He turned back toward the school. For a moment, Aisha thought he might look up, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into his pocket, took out a folded piece of paper, and slipped it under the strap of the bulletin board near the gate, a quiet note for whoever needed it next. Then he stepped off the curb, swung a leg over his bike, and started the engine. It joined the distant hum like one more instrument in a song already written. Aisha's hand remained on the window as the vibration returned, faint but clear. The bike rolled forward, following the others. She didn't blink until the sound disappeared completely. The silence left behind was not empty. It was full of something new, possibility, maybe, or peace. Her mother squeezed her shoulder once, gentle but firm. "Ready to learn, sweetheart?" she asked. Aisha nodded. The word ready meant something different now. She opened her notebook again. The pencil waited between her fingers. The air around her was quiet enough that she could hear the ticking of the classroom clock, the soft scrape of another student's eraser, the distant bark of a dog outside. Every sound seemed to belong. Every sound seemed true. The last of the exhaust haze drifted past the window and dissolved into light. Aisha lowered her pencil to the paper, drawing a single line. It wasn't a word yet, but it was a start. The desk trembled faintly beneath her arm as if remembering the engines. She smiled, barely, just enough for herself. Outside, the street settled back into stillness. Inside, the world began again. The convoy rolled, and the window hummed under her palm. The sound of engines had thinned into distance by the time Aisha set her pencil down. The world outside her window was still trembling softly, like the last line of a song fading under the door. The convoy was leaving, not in a rush, but in rhythm. Each motor rolled into motion, folding into the next, like a line of words written without space between them. Aisha's hand stayed on the glass until the cool returned. The purple vest against her shoulders held a faint trace of warmth from the morning sun, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. She could still feel the hum of the motorcycles inside her ribs, the steady pulse that had once sounded like thunder and now felt like a heartbeat, slow, human, kind. Outside, Jack stood by the gate, his silhouette sharp against the light. He lifted his hand, 2 fingers raised in signal, and every rider understood. It was not a command, it was a release. Aisha saw him tuck something small under the bulletin board near the stairs, then step back, satisfied. He did not look toward the cameras. He looked at the school itself, at the windows full of faces, and nodded once, as if to say, "You are safe now." The first bikes turned onto the street, engines rumbling in unison. The sound deepened and rolled forward, less like an army and more like a prayer. Tires brushed against asphalt in long arcs. Chrome caught the light and threw it back across the brick walls of the school. The reporters lowered their microphones, their voices softening into afterthoughts. Rosie crossed the street with her apron tied in a knot at her hip and handed Jack a cup of coffee. He accepted it, nodded his thanks, and stayed where he was until the last helmet passed. Inside the classroom, the teacher finally spoke, her voice small but steady. "All right, everyone, take out your notebooks." The scrape of chairs returned, timid but real. Paper rustled like leaves in wind. Aisha opened her own notebook to a clean page. The air no longer smelled like fuel. It smelled like pencil shavings and floor polish, and the faint sweetness of the cafeteria down the hall. Ordinary thing, beautiful things. Her mother appeared in the hallway window, one hand resting on the frame. Aisha looked up, and they shared a quiet smile. It was not a smile of victory. It was something gentler, a confirmation that the day had truly begun again. Her mother mouthed the words, "You did good," and Aisha, without thinking, nodded. The sound outside settled into silence. The convoy had turned the corner. The police tape fluttered once, then stilled. A bird landed on the lamppost, where the first microphone had been clipped, and began to preen its wings. Unconcerned, the scene had emptied itself of noise, leaving only light. Aisha touched the page. Her hand shook slightly, but not from fear. She wrote, slowly and carefully, "My name is Aisha. I was here when it happened." The pencil left a trail of graphite that gleamed before dulling to gray. She paused, then added another line, "I was not brave alone." She stared at the words, then traced the curve of the O in, alone, with her fingertip until the motion steadied her breathing. She felt her pulse returning to its normal rhythm. The teacher passed between rows, handing out math worksheets. Aisha slid her notebook half beneath the new page but didn't close it. Some stories needed to stay open for a while. Through the window she could still see Jack. He stood near his bike, helmet tucked under one arm, coffee cooling in his other hand. He looked tired, but the kind of tired that came after something right. He glanced up toward the building once more, not searching for anyone, just making sure the space he'd protected still stood. Then he finished his coffee, crushed the cup lightly in his hand, and slipped it into the trash. Before he left, he touched the folded paper on the bulletin board, the one he'd tucked there earlier. The wind tugged at its corner, but it stayed. Then he swung his leg over the bike, turned the key, and let the engine purr to life. It was a smaller sound now, softer than before, more like a promise than a warning. He rode away without looking back. Aisha followed his path until he disappeared beyond the trees. The road shimmered faintly in the heat. For a moment, the reflection of the sky looked like water, and she imagined the convoy crossing it. 200 bikes gliding across a quiet river. Engines leaving ripples behind instead of smoke. The hum in her chest began to fade. In its place grew a calm, even rhythm, the sound of pencils scratching, pages turning, a student's laugh bubbling up in the back row, the kind of sounds that make a life. She looked at her vest, still bright against her shoulders. She unzipped it halfway, then pulled it snug again. The click of the zipper sounded final and certain. She wasn't taking it off yet. It didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like belonging. Her teacher's chalk tapped the board, the word numbers scrawled across it in pale dust. Aisha smiled. Numbers made sense. They stayed steady when the rest of the world tilted, but she knew that stories mattered too. The ones told out loud, and the ones written quietly when no one was watching. She turned another page in her notebook and wrote, "I will remember the sound of help." The letters were small, almost whispering, but the sentence carried weight. She underlined, "Help," once, slow and deliberate. Outside, the reporters packed their gear. Parents exchanged soft goodbyes and promises to meet again. The school bell rang once, bright and clean. The building shook off its mourning like dust from its shoulders. Aisha's mother waved one last time through the glass and walked toward the parking lot, her steps light. Aisha set her pencil down and looked around the room. Everything felt sharper, the edges of desks, the sunlight on the floor. Even the air seemed new. She realized she could hear herself breathing, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't sound like waiting, it sounded like living. The last line she wrote that morning was simple. The day moved forward, and so did we. She pressed her palm flat against the page to keep it from curling, then lifted her hand to the window. The glass no longer trembled beneath her touch. It was still, quiet, and steady, reflecting only her face and the faint streaks of sunlight behind her. Outside, far beyond the corner, the convoy rolled down the open road, 200 engines carrying the echo of a small girl's courage into places she might never see. The window hummed once more, and then it was gone. The afternoon found its balance again, sunlight stretching long and quiet across the desks. By now, the classroom felt like a held breath finally let go. The chalk dust had settled, the pencils moved in soft rhythm, and the air smelled faintly of erasers and warm paper. Aisha sat still for a moment, hands folded on her notebook, listening to the hum of the world returning to normal. It was the same classroom, the same walls, but everything inside it seemed to have learned how to stand taller. She touched the zipper of her purple vest. The metal was cool now, the weight familiar. It was no longer armor. It was memory. It pressed lightly between her shoulder blades, not pushing her forward but reminding her that she could move whenever she wished. The vest had become a promise stitched into cloth, a quiet hand at her back. Outside, the playground shimmered under a forgiving sun. The voices of children floated through the window, ordinary voices, free of warning. Aisha could pick out laughter from the swings, the squeak of chains, the thud of sneakers hitting the ground. Those sounds no longer scared her. They sounded like what they truly were. Life continuing. She smiled. A small one, but steady. When the final bell rang, it did not sound like an alarm. It was gentle, like a song remembering its refrain. Students rose from their seats, the scrape of chairs echoing softly. Aisha gathered her things carefully, sliding her notebook into her backpack as though it were something fragile and valuable. Her teacher smiled at her on the way out. A simply look, but full of quiet knowing, the kind of look that says, "I saw you, even when you were silent." The hallway was filled with sunlight that had turned gold around the edges. Aisha walked beside her mother, who had been waiting near the door. They didn't need to speak. The warmth in the air said everything. When they stepped outside, the light pressed gently on their faces, and Aisha squinted up at the sky, as if she could see the last of the morning's smoke lifting away. By the gate, a few riders remained, not all 200, just enough to draw the shape of a memory against the curb. Their engines were quiet now, hands resting on handlebars, helmets glinting. They didn't form a wall. They formed a line of patience. Aisha's eyes found Jack among them. He wasn't wearing his helmet anymore. His hair was wind-tangled, his expression calm. He gave her a nod, nothing grand, just a silent thank you between people who had both stayed when it mattered. Jack reached into his jacket and slipped something under the bulletin board by the gate. He didn't linger to see it stay. A corner of the folded paper fluttered once in the breeze. a small, white wing. Then he turned, adjusted the strap of his glove, and swung onto his bike. The engine rumbled low and warm, a heartbeat against the ground. One by one, the others followed. They didn't roar away. They drifted off like the tide leaving a clean shore. Aisha and her mother began the walk home. The world looked softer. The sidewalk seemed wider, the air less crowded. The grocery store door chimed when they passed, releasing the scent of lemons and bread. The man at the counter waved. Aisha waved back. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary kindness, which felt like the rarest kind of magic. The stairwell of their building was lit by slanted evening light. The steps no longer echoed with her heartbeat the way they had before. At the top landing, she paused, turning to look down. The street was empty now, except for a piece of paper still caught on the bulletin board. Even from here, she could make out the edges, a child's drawing of a dinosaur, and, beneath it, the words written in careful block letters, "Keep the road kind." Her lips parted in a small breath. It wasn't a message to her exactly, but it was hers all the same. She smiled, turned the key in the lock, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled like fresh rice, and her mother's candle, a faint trace of cinnamon that meant home. The window was open just enough to let the air move. Aisha placed her backpack on the chair and unzipped her vest. The sound of the zipper was soft, deliberate, final. She folded the vest and draped it over the back of the chair, smoothing it once with her palm. The fabric caught the sunset, turning a deeper violet. Her mother handed her a glass of water, and Aisha drank. The cold ran through her chest like clarity. They sat at the table, not speaking for a while. The city outside sighed its ordinary noises. Distant engine, laughter, a dog barking at nothing in particular. For the first time, those sounds blended easily with her own breathing. After dinner, Aisha brought out her notebook again. The Stegosaurus waited on the edge of the table, its plastic plates glowing faintly in the lamplight. She flipped through the pages she had written before, the ones about fear and proof, and the morning at Rosie's diner. Each word looked different now, not because they had changed, but because she had. Her handwriting still slanted slightly to the right, like it was moving toward something certain. She found a blank page and began to write, "My name is Aisha. I am 7 years old. I saw what happened. I saw people help." Her pencil paused. The graphite shimmered in the light before fading matte. She thought about the sound of the engines, the click of the lock, the hush after the noise. She thought about Agent Reyes's voice, about Jack's nod, about the calm in her mother's eyes. Then she wrote again, "Being helped feels like standing still while the ground learns your name." The line sat there, sure of itself. She read it twice, once with her eyes and once with her chest. Then she added one more, "I will remember the sound of help, and I will remember that my story changed someone else's." She drew a tiny stegosaurus next to the last sentence and shaded it until it looked like it was walking toward the words. When she was done, she leaned back in her chair. The lamp flickered once, as if approving. Her mother passed behind her, brushing a hand through her hair. "All finished?" she asked. Aisha nodded. "For now," she said. Outside, a soft wind moved through the trees, the leaves whispering secrets too small for the city to notice. Somewhere far away, maybe miles down the highway, a single motorcycle engine answered with a low, steady hum. It was not loud enough to reach anyone else, but Aisha heard it anyway. The sound folded into her heartbeat and stayed there. She closed the notebook, pressed her palm against the cover, and felt the warmth it had gathered. Then she carried it to her desk and placed it beside her school books. The vest stayed on the chair, quiet and certain, like a friend who would wait as long as needed. When she climbed into bed, the Stegosaurus sat beside her pillow. She turned off the light and the city glowed faintly through the curtains, amber and soft. The color of peace earned. She thought about Rosie's diner, about the first time she had seen it through fog, about the bell above the door, and how every story starts with a small sound that means, "Come in." Her breathing evened out. The hum of the city drifted around her like the echo of an old song. Just before sleep came, Aisha whispered to the dark, almost smiling, "The road is kind," and in that small, steady silence, it was, at its heart, Aisha's story is about courage, the quiet kind that doesn't shout, but endure. It reminds us that bravery isn't always about fighting back in noise or anger. Sometimes, it's about standing still, naming what's wrong, and allowing truth to breathe. In a world that often rewards silence or compliance, Aisha's journey shows that breaking the silence is an act of dignity, not defiance. She teaches us that justice begins not with laws or titles, but with the small, human decision to care, to see someone being hurt, and choose not to look away. The story also invites us to rethink what protection means. Real safety doesn't come from walls or rules. It comes from people who show up. Jack and the riders didn't rescue Aisha. They stood beside her until the world listened. In that, the story reflects the truth of any community. When one person dares to speak, others find their voice too. Real gold fears no fire, as the saying goes, and when compassion is tested, it shines brighter. For anyone who has faced injustice or watched it in silence, Aisha's voice is a gentle reminder. It's never too late to step forward. Healing begins when we stop pretending the wound isn't there. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone break the silence and change everything? I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need its message, and subscribe for more powerful stories of truth, resilience, and hope. May your week bring quiet strength, steady kindness, and the peace that follows when light is finally allowed to enter.